They said it would never happen, that Mexico needed the United States far more than the United States needed Mexico. But in a move that stunned global markets, Mexico just pulled the trigger on an economic counterstrike so devastating it could cripple one of America's most vital industries overnight. For decades, the United States auto industry has relied on a delicate supply chain, with Mexico providing everything from transmissions to entire engine assemblies. Now that supply chain is collapsing. Car factories are shutting down, dealerships are running out of stock, and American workers are facing job losses at an unprecedented scale. But this is just the beginning. How did this crisis spiral out of control? Why did Mexico make such a drastic move? And most importantly, what does this mean for you? Buckle up, because what you are about to learn changes everything. What's happening? Most people thought this was just a bluff until Mexico actually pulled the trigger and halted critical automotive exports to the United States. In an astonishing turn of events, border checkpoints transformed overnight from busy trade arteries into high-stakes choke points. Factories in the United States, reliant on steady shipments of components like wiring harnesses and engine parts, were left scrambling for answers. At first, analysts insisted this was political theater or an extreme bluff, but Mexico's bold decision showed it was anything but idle talk. Industry executives, once confident that Mexico depended too heavily on export revenues to make a drastic move, found themselves blindsided. They realized that Mexico had spent years deepening trade relationships with other nations, quietly preparing for a scenario where the United States might impose punitive tariffs. While some American officials believed that tough rhetoric and deadlines would force Mexico's hand, the exact opposite unfolded. The shutdown of vital supply lines demonstrated that Mexico had examined its cards and decided to play an ace. This was not an impulsive reaction, but a strategic counterstrike designed to send a crystal-clear message. If the United States intended to squeeze Mexico with tariffs, then Mexico would use its own leverage in ways no one fully anticipated. And this was only the start. What unfolded next would shake the market to its core. Factories at a standstill. The immediate fallout. Imagine thousands of half-built cars abandoned on factory floors overnight, each missing a crucial part that was supposed to arrive from Mexico that morning. Production lines came to a halt almost instantly, exposing just how precarious the system truly was. For decades, automotive manufacturing in the United States relied on seamless, just-in-time deliveries that kept warehouses lean and costs low. That strategy turned into a catastrophic vulnerability once Mexico closed the tap. Dealerships felt the shock as well. Sales teams reported an immediate dip in available models, forcing many customers to wait weeks or even months. Prices on vehicles still in stock began to climb, fueled by panic buying and supply constraints. Meanwhile, businesses downstream, parts suppliers, haulers, and even local retailers, faced a domino effect of reduced orders and fading revenue. Repair shops, reliant on imported components, also scrambled to find new sources. Consumers panicked at headlines warning of further shortages, prompting a rush on remaining inventory. The entire industry realized that the same mechanism designed to streamline production had backfired, leaving every American car brand on the brink of a logistical nightmare. But the crisis would not remain economic. Politics soon took center stage. The unexpected political explosion. Trump's tariff gamble was meant to corner Mexico, but now his own supporters are turning on him. Within days of the export shutdown, labor unions and auto workers voiced outrage, arguing that trade policies intended to protect American jobs had instead threatened them. People who once championed tariff-driven approaches to safeguard domestic manufacturing found themselves facing layoffs or drastically shortened work schedules. Inside Washington, factions clashed over how to respond. Some officials demanded an even tougher stance on Mexico, convinced that doubling down on tariffs would make Mexico relent. Others warned that continuing a brinksmanship approach could accelerate economic fallout and risk a deeper recession. Auto industry lobbyists filled congressional offices, pleading for relief measures or a quick deal that would allow factories to resume normal operations. Supporters of Trump's tough talk questioned why Mexico had moved so decisively, yet they could not deny the devastation taking root in cities like Detroit, where production lines abruptly fell silent. A rising number of American citizens and politicians began pointing out the unsettling truth. Mexico's move highlighted just how entrenched cross-border supply chains had become. Then came the startling discovery that Mexico had more leverage than anyone realized. The secret reason Mexico holds the cards. Here's where it gets really interesting. Mexico's economy is not as fragile as most people assume, and that hard truth is catching many off guard. Plus, partnership deals with the European Union, robust ties to China, and emerging relationships in Central and South America gave Mexico options it never had in previous decades. That Mexico would simply cave under tariff threats ignored these new alliances. Indeed, Mexico leveraged its robust manufacturing networks to find alternative buyers for certain components, blunting the impact of lost American revenue. As a result, Mexico's own economic pain, though real, did not spiral to the extreme levels many in Washington had anticipated. Automakers, once confident in their influence over cross-border regulations, now found themselves on the defensive. Executives rushed to reassure shareholders that they had backup plans, but investors were not convinced. Companies had gambled on North American integration for so long that few had contingency plans ready for a complete Mexican export freeze. And that is precisely why automakers found themselves facing the worst crisis of their careers. By relying so heavily on Mexico for core components, they lost any fallback option when political and economic tensions exploded. Deals that once streamlined production had become the Achilles heel of an entire industry. Now, with factories idle and inventories shrinking, car buyers and auto workers alike braced for a new reality. The cost of vehicles would soar, and job losses could climb if Mexico's counterstrike continued. The American public, meanwhile, woke up to a stark realization. Arguments that tariffs would secure jobs no longer seemed so convincing. Instead, those policies triggered a sequence of events, allowing Mexico to demonstrate its unexpected strength. Suddenly, the talk among political leaders shifted from how to punish Mexico to how to persuade it to restore the flow of parts. This pivotal moment in automotive history did not just reveal a flaw in trade policy. It signaled a monumental shift in how global supply chains operate. Companies discovered that a single disruption could turn their entire business upside down. In the days ahead, Washington would find itself wrestling with a complex question: double down on tariffs and risk further chaos, or try to negotiate a truce that might come with uncomfortable concessions. Either path seemed risky, and market watchers predicted the industry might never look the same again. The old assumptions about who really needed whom were gone, replaced by a new understanding that in an interconnected world, leverage does not always lie where it appears. And this was only the beginning of the unfolding drama, with more twists, turns, and revelations sure to come. Can't we just build it ourselves? Why not just shift production back home? The reality is far worse than you think. Many politicians and commentators have floated this question, imagining an effortless return to domestic production. Yet this vision collides with a difficult truth. The infrastructure in the United States of America is woefully unprepared for an immediate transition. Manufacturing plants require years of planning, vast sums of money, and highly skilled labor to match the specialized capabilities that Mexico has refined for decades. Local communities and industrial states have not received substantial modernization since the late 1990s, leaving rusting facilities that cannot handle current production demands. Meanwhile, labor costs and regulatory complexities are substantially higher, resulting in fewer competitive advantages for companies trying to assemble vehicles on home turf. Hidden beneath optimistic slogans are formidable obstacles. Creating new factories is not as simple as erecting 4 walls and installing machinery. It involves building an entire ecosystem of suppliers, transportation networks, and trained personnel who can navigate intricate assembly processes. That level of coordination has taken Mexico many years to perfect. Reversing that momentum within a few months or even a handful of years is wishful thinking. Major automobile corporations, wary of losing billions of dollars in revenue, understand that abrupt reshoring might exacerbate the crisis rather than solve it. Dreams of instant success often overlook the long timelines involved in environmental compliance, land acquisition, and workforce development. Even with governmental incentives or tax breaks, the resources needed to replicate Mexico's advanced infrastructure go far beyond quick policy maneuvers. As the reshoring fantasy began collapsing under its own weight, desperate eyes turned elsewhere. Executives realized they could not afford endless delays, so they launched an urgent mission to find alternative regions for parts production. This frantic search became the next phase of the industry's struggle to stay afloat, a scramble for new suppliers. Desperate times call for desperate measures, but sometimes those measures are more damaging than the crisis. When it became evident that rebuilding domestic capacity would take far too long, leading automobile manufacturers scrambled for help in distant markets. They pursued partnerships with factories in China, India, and nations across Southeast Asia, all in an attempt to replace the now frozen pipeline from Mexico. At first glance, this seemed like a straightforward fix. After all, many of these countries already produce components for various global automakers. However, hidden problems began to emerge almost immediately. Quality standards varied widely, and shipping fragile parts across oceans introduced logistical nightmares. During a period when every passing day meant potential millions of dollars in lost sales, the arrival of subpar or incorrect parts forced additional delays on assembly lines. Some companies discovered that necessary certifications were lacking, while others faced language barriers and unreliable customs processes. These setbacks inflated costs more than anyone had initially predicted. Meanwhile, managers on the ground reported spiraling challenges in coordination, especially when time zones and cultural differences hampered swift decision-making. That is when manufacturing experts started warning the chase for instant solutions might cost more in the long run. By spreading production lines too thin, automakers risked losing control over quality and jeopardizing worker safety. Even so, with each passing week, the financial strain intensified. No one could ignore the looming judgment of investors who watched share prices drop and began questioning the future stability of a once unstoppable sector. Sensing that volatility, major funds and individual shareholders moved swiftly, setting the stage for a chain reaction on the stock market that spilled well beyond car manufacturing. Wall Street's worst nightmare, auto stocks are tanking, yet the real financial shock is hitting industries we never expected. Observers often treat the automobile sector as a bellwether of economic health, but few anticipated just how swiftly this crisis would drag down multiple interconnected fields. Suppliers of steel and aluminum witnessed a steep drop in orders, prompting them to scale back operations and lay off employees. Electronics companies that provide infotainment systems and sensors for modern vehicles also felt the squeeze. As their biggest clients pulled back on new contracts, even logistics enterprises found themselves navigating extra chaos, scrambling to reroute shipments and renegotiate carrier deals at a time when global freight costs were already soaring. Anxiety rippled through financial markets as analysts warned about broader recessionary threats tied to the auto industry's ongoing turmoil. Where investors once saw steady gains, they now observed alarming red lines on charts that signaled mass sell-offs. Shares of prominent automotive giants plummeted in value, prompting top executives to hold emergency conference calls aimed at reassuring jittery stakeholders. Unfortunately, those reassurances rang hollow when parts remained stuck in customs or had yet to be identified at all. Banks started tightening credit for manufacturers deemed high risk, sending fear throughout supply chains that had long relied on revolving lines of credit. The ripple effect extended to commercial real estate firms leasing warehouse space, retailers selling automotive accessories, and even consumer confidence indexes that track large purchases. If the auto sector stumbled, experts warned, the resulting shockwave could push other vulnerable areas of the economy to the brink. Amid all this uncertainty, murmurs of an even bigger confrontation grew louder. National pride and mounting frustration threatened to magnify the dispute into something far more destructive. A trade war on the horizon? Think this is just a Mexico-United States of America standoff. Other countries are quietly picking sides and fueling the flames. As American officials toyed with the idea of imposing harsher tariffs, Mexico signaled readiness to further restrict certain exports if provoked. Meanwhile, Nations across Europe and Asia saw opportunities to benefit from the turbulence. Some aligned with Mexico, out of dissatisfaction with perceived American trade aggression, while others pondered separate deals with the United States of America if it promised better market access for their own industries. Observers began drawing parallels to earlier global trade standoffs that escalated beyond their original scope, with automobile manufacturing at the center. Potential secondary tariffs on products like agricultural goods, electronics, or chemicals loomed on the horizon. Business leaders sounded alarms that a multi-front trade war might dwarf anything the modern economy had ever encountered, especially if powerful blocs committed to defending their interests at all costs. Amid the chaos, one nation quietly saw an opening to expand its influence. This potential rival aimed to lure automakers, offer competitive production, and forge new alliances that would tilt the balance of power. If tensions between Mexico and the United States of America continued, that ambitious player could rewrite the global narrative of automobile manufacturing, seizing both economic and political advantages. The final question was whether anyone would step in to de-escalate the situation before the automotive world changed beyond recognition, or if both countries would push each other into a lasting impasse that reshaped global markets forever. China's big opportunity. There is one nation watching this crisis unfold with a satisfied grin, and it is not Mexico. By imposing tariffs that triggered Mexico's bold retaliation, the United States inadvertently opened the door for a different economic powerhouse. As supply chains buckle and American factories sit idle, Chinese manufacturers sense a golden chance to expand their influence across the automotive world. For years, China has been fortifying its position as a leader in vehicle production, refining its factories, and investing heavily in emerging technologies. Now, with the United States grappling over trade battles, Chinese firms can step in to fill the gaps left by disrupted American supply lines. Some United States automakers, desperate to secure critical components, are already turning to Chinese suppliers despite the challenges of longer shipping routes and the complexities of international regulations. Meanwhile, Chinese vehicle brands eye overseas markets with renewed confidence. They know that a fractured North American supply chain may weaken the once mighty American competition. If Mexico reduces its shipments to the United States, Chinese automakers could offer partnerships or joint ventures, providing much-needed components or even fully assembled vehicles. This crisis underscores how a single trade war can alter the global pecking order, and China is poised to capitalize on every available opportunity. But the rising electric vehicle wave might change everything. Transitioning forward, it becomes clear that an entirely different sector of the automotive industry is gathering momentum amid the chaos. The rise of electric vehicles. Strangely, this crisis could be the best thing that ever happened to electric car companies. With traditional assembly lines grinding to a halt, automakers tied to internal combustion engines face supply disruptions they never anticipated. Electric vehicle manufacturers, on the other hand, rely on a different set of components and manufacturing processes that may sidestep Mexico's restrictions more easily. Tesla, Rivian, and other innovators have invested heavily in domestic facilities for battery production and research. By contrast, conventional brands once boasted a well-honed pipeline through Mexico for engines and transmissions. Now these older giants must scramble for new suppliers, endure longer production timelines, or retool entire factories at enormous expense. Electric vehicles are not entirely immune to global uncertainties. Yet their simpler drivetrains, combined with more localized battery production, grant them surprising resilience. In a time of automotive crisis, the momentum behind electrification only seems to accelerate, generating fresh consumer interest and investor optimism. This shift might hasten the end of the internal combustion era sooner than expected, as car buyers and corporations alike see fewer reasons to cling to the old guard. Other industries in the crossfire. What most people do not realize is that this crisis is not just about cars. Agriculture, retail, and even technology are caught in the crossfire. And the consequences are spreading faster than anyone predicted. When Mexico retaliated against the tariffs, it was not just auto parts that stopped flowing. It was a signal that no industry was safe from the fallout. The agricultural sector, for example, is now facing an unexpected blow. For decades, farmers in the United States have relied on exports to Mexico, shipping everything from corn and soybeans to beef and dairy. Mexico is one of the largest buyers of American agricultural products, and without that trade, farmers are staring at surplus crops, falling prices, and financial ruin. The ripple effect is devastating. A farmer in the Midwest may not think much about the auto industry, but when trade disputes lead to Mexican tariffs on American produce, it directly impacts their ability to sell crops at competitive prices. Suddenly, they are struggling to make loan payments, and entire farming communities are feeling the strain. Retail is another industry taking a direct hit. With car production slowing down, dealerships are not the only ones suffering. Every major retailer that sells auto-related products, parts, tires, maintenance tools, is watching sales decline. Even broader retailers like large department stores are seeing lower foot traffic. Why? When people worry about job security, they cut back on spending. And with factories shutting down and layoffs mounting, consumer confidence is plummeting. Fewer people are making big purchases, which means stores are moving less inventory, leading to a cascading effect on retail supply chains. Then there is technology. While it may seem disconnected from manufacturing, the reality is that modern vehicles are packed with electronics. Semiconductors, sensors, and advanced computer systems are all essential in today's automobiles. And many of these components are sourced from Mexican factories. As the supply chain crumbles, technology companies find themselves in a difficult position. The semiconductor industry, which was already recovering from a global shortage, is now facing another crisis. With fewer cars being made, companies that specialize in vehicle electronics are seeing contracts canceled and orders delayed. It is a nightmare for a sector that has barely recovered from past disruptions. This crisis is proving one thing: global trade is far more interconnected than most people realize. The shock waves from the auto industry's collapse are not stopping at factories or dealerships. They are reaching farms, retail chains, and high-tech industries, rewriting the rules of trade. And that is why some believe this moment could be the turning point for manufacturing in the United States. America's next big shift. Could this be the wake-up call that finally transforms manufacturing in the United States? For decades, companies have outsourced production to countries where labor is cheaper, materials are easier to access, and regulations are less restrictive. But now, with supply chains failing, the idea of rebuilding American manufacturing is gaining traction. Some policymakers are pushing for a bold strategy: reshoring. The idea is simple: bring factories back to the United States, reduce dependence on foreign suppliers, and create more domestic jobs. Supporters argue that this crisis proves the dangers of relying too heavily on a single country, especially one that can retaliate in a trade dispute. They point to the growing frustration among automakers who cannot get parts, farmers who are losing export markets, and retailers who are watching consumers tighten their budgets. The argument is that the best way to ensure stability is to manufacture essential goods at home. But is reshoring really the solution? The reality is not so simple. Building factories in the United States is expensive. Companies that have spent decades optimizing global supply chains cannot just turn back the clock overnight. Labor costs are higher, environmental regulations are stricter, and infrastructure takes years to develop. Even with government incentives, it would take a long time before American factories could match the efficiency and scale of foreign operations. Then there is the question of workforce readiness. Manufacturing jobs have declined over the years, and many of the skills needed for modern production are in short supply. If factories are brought back, there will need to be a major investment in worker training and automation. Some believe this could be an opportunity for a new industrial revolution in the United States, one where highly automated factories, staffed by skilled workers, could compete with international rivals. However, this shift is not just about economics. It is also about power. Trade disputes have long been used as political tools, and now, as tensions rise between the United States and Mexico, other nations are watching closely. Some are preparing to step in and reshape global trade to their advantage. The global realignment. As the United States and Mexico clash, other nations see a chance to reshape the world order. For years, International trade has revolved around agreements that link economies together, creating partnerships that benefit multiple countries. But now, as tensions rise, the old system is starting to crack. Take the European Union, for example. With the United States embroiled in a trade standoff, European manufacturers see an opportunity to fill the gap. Automakers in Germany and France are already expanding their markets, offering alternatives to American-built vehicles. If Mexico shifts its exports toward Europe, it could strengthen its economic ties with the region, further reducing its dependence on the United States. Then there is China, which has been carefully watching the situation unfold. For years, China has sought to become the dominant player in global manufacturing. Now, with the United States struggling to maintain its supply chains, China has a chance to step in and offer solutions. Some American automakers, desperate for parts, may have no choice but to look toward Chinese suppliers, further increasing China's influence in the industry. Canada is another key player in this realignment. As tensions between the United States and Mexico grow, Canada is in a position to negotiate new trade terms that could shift supply chains northward. The country has a well-developed auto sector, and if it can offer a stable alternative to Mexico, it could attract new investments from automakers looking for a safer, more predictable production base. This global shift is not just about cars, it is about the balance of power in the world economy. Countries that can adapt quickly will benefit, while those that remain stuck in old trade models may find themselves struggling to compete. The question now is whether the United States can recognize these changes in time to adjust, or if it will be left behind as new trade alliances take shape. The next move will determine everything. But what do you think? Let's talk in the comments. What's your take on this? Thanks for watching.